second, it's connected. The Seahawks? Interesting. Good team this year, huh?
Maybe only 4 or 5 point favorites against the Rams. Yes.
It is still a big part of our culture.
Have you seen the movie Groundhog Day?
Oh, interesting. Wonder how I get this to go over there. If I can. Or how come? It must be. Ah. Hmm. Oh, this one?
Yeah.
The guy that's got his name on it?
Yeah. Holy.
Yeah, you're really asking, I think you're asking a different question.
Who wrote Esther?
Oh, Esther. I thought you were talking about Briar Rabbit.
Oh, no. Jeez.
We're going to talk about that today, actually. So, in 45 seconds.
Yeah, I was reading a commentary about that in Israel and the connections. It's like Chronicle, like it was very interesting because they didn't take a stand. Maybe this, maybe that.
Right, and I'm not going to either.
Yeah.
I can't, because we'll never know.
It doesn't seem
Yeah.
but I know already.
The illustrations are great, but they're not really children's stories.
There's one that I did.
They're all children's stories, but they're not, right?
Yeah.
Like most old children's stories.
No, it's not it's not that way. It's that, I mean, those started as oral traditions amongst the slaves, right? So they weren't parents here. So I got quite a bit of feedback this past week, and I'm really grateful for that. And I want to address some of the issues that came up. There's a in the 20s. I don't in the 20s. I don't know that I would say a single professor who focuses on Jewish history constitutes a Jewish studies program, but when Jewish historians look back in the United States and education in Jewish studies, they go all the way back to the 20s. The Jewish studies really flourished within public institutions, higher learning institutions in the 60s and 70s. I don't know that it was driven by the Pope's friendship with this rabbi, but it was an opportunity for the public to really take a greater, have a greater acceptance of Judaism and Jewish studies within the context of the United States. The second thing that was said to me was, I'm not sure that I would have associated Esther with the Holocaust. And we talked about that, and we talked about how under the Volmark and the Nazi regime. Esther was not allowed to be read. Purim was not allowed to be celebrated in the synagogues, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. I was not trying to communicate that the book of Esther inspired the Holocaust. There was an evil individual who was anti-Semitic and had some very racist views and some very supremacy views of his own race, and used the book of Esther as a justification to bring along the rest of the population. Used a lot of other techniques as well, but Esther was in that. So I was not trying to build a cause and effect. I was really just trying to say there's a history here where Esther has been misused. Someone else came to me and said, who wrote Esther and when was it written, as it related to comedy? Because they had never heard it stated that the book of Esther was a book of comedy. And the short answer is, I don't know and I don't know. The long answer or longer answer is, there are a number of people who like to say or speculate on who wrote the book of Esther, but one that stands out is Josephus, who wrote like 600 years later and claims that Mordecai wrote it. There are phrases in the book, which is how they determine when it was written, that suggest that someone contemporary to ancient Persia wrote the book. So if the events occurred that we read about between 486 and 465, which was the reign of Xerxes, and if in 312 Alexander conquered Persia, then if you still had these ancient Persian terms written, it needed to be written sometime between those dates, right? 300 years BCE to 450 years before Christ. But some people extend that into perhaps it was after the Greek takeover of Persia with Alexander during the Hellenistic period, and some of those phrases would still have been usable. But pushing it all the way to into the Christian era is probably a little too late. There were just too many suggestions. So somewhere between 200 BC and 500 is probably when it was written. It was definitely written by somebody who had firsthand account. There's just too many details about the palace, about the way the inner workings of the court happened to suggest that they were just making this up. It does seem to be pretty accurate. And then I went back and listened to, for those of you who are interested, you can find these classes on the University Church of Christ Denver YouTube site under sermons. And I went back and listened to last week's, and one of the things that I did not say as I was talking about Brer Rabbit was that those were, and there's a book over there that Will is holding up at the present time of Brer Rabbit. It's transcribed, but they started out as oral traditions amongst the slaves in the South. They were not originally children's stories. They originally were really stories to help the mental health of the slaves at the time, and have since been understood to be somewhat subversive. So that's the corrections and whatever. I put this slide up last week at the end of our class. Esther is a comedy, sort of starting with the punchline. The book is meant to be funny. It's meant to provoke laughter. We defined the idea of burlesque, which is a non-judgmental artistic composition that vulgarizes lofty material and makes a mockery of it. And we find that that's exactly what's happening within the book of Esther for everything that the Persian Empire is known for, from the communication system to the wealth to the partying, extravagant living, et cetera, et cetera. We talked a little bit about hidden transcripts, a term defined by James C. Scott in his book, Domination and the Art of Resistance. The motifs within hidden transcript: the world turned upside down, role reversal, revenge fantasy, a trickster figure, joking and humor. And these were ways that people who were oppressed adapted to their environment. And it's very hard for me as an individual to relate to this. I have never been considered a possession. I have never felt that I was completely helpless. I have never felt that I did not have an option. Now, there have been times when I've felt kind of like that, but I don't think I've ever felt like there's nothing I can do. I am trapped, and I am so overpowered that I have no rights. I have no recourse whatsoever. But that's what it's like when you're a slave. That's what it's like when you're in exile. That's what it's like when you are part of the group of people that we talk about in the book of Esther. So very quickly, I wanted to demonstrate, I don't think it's hard to imagine how the book of Esther fits this motif of the world turned upside down. I don't think it's very difficult to imagine how the book of Esther communicates revenge fantasy. The trickster figure we'll talk about a little bit more as we get into the text. The joking and the humor I'd like to demonstrate today. And the role reversal, I made some, I made a table of, I think, 10 or 12 places where I felt like there was some role reversal going on within the text. And we'll just go through these very quickly. Esther and Vashti. Vashti was the queen with agency. She refuses to see the king. Esther is a powerless Jewish woman. She becomes the queen. Esther and Ahasuerus, the king. The king holds absolute authority, and Esther is just a silent person. But by the end, Esther is directing the king on what he ought to do. Mordecai and Haman. Haman is an exalted official, perhaps the most exalted official at the beginning of the story. Mordecai is just a minor official in the gate. At the end, Mordecai is the most exalted official in the kingdom, and Haman is executed. As it relates to Haman, his plans to execute Mordecai end up being his own downfall, and he is executed on his own gallows. Jews in the Persian Empire. At the beginning of the story, the Jews are a condemned race. At the end of the story, they are legally empowered to destroy their enemies. Initially, the Jews feared the imperial violence. At the end, it says that many people feared the Jews before that day of battle. Royal decrees were turned upside down or reversed when the decree for Jewish annihilation turns into a counter decree for Jewish revenge. Public honor, Mordecai is ignored when he saves the king, and Haman is very much honored. At the end of the story, Mordecai is publicly honored by Haman. Power and threat. Haman names Jews as the enemy of the state. At the end of the story, Esther names Haman as the enemy of the Jews. And finally, with regard to Purim, does anyone know what Purim means? Lots. Why is that? How does that relate to the story? It says every day, Haman rolled the dice and decided which day, which month and which day will we exterminate the Jews. And that was publicly known. So he was throwing dice every day. And they're called Purim. Now, I want you to think about how crazy that is, that this holiday, Purim, is named after the lots. Okay, we will talk about that as we go on, but can you imagine if there was a decree that everyone in the University Church of Christ was to be executed with an AK-47 on a particular day? And we somehow got out of that, and we decided to name a holiday, and we'll call it AK-47 Day. It is a little ridiculous, but we'll talk more about that as we get into it. But Purim is a day set for Jewish destruction, and it ends up being a celebration of their survival.
How did the lots work? I mean, he rolled them every day?
Yeah.
It's not like a one time and it set the date?
No, it was a form of ancient terrorism as I look at it, but we'll look at it in the text. But the text actually says every day he would roll the dice to figure out when it was going to happen. And so it seems as though, at least that's the way I read it and understand it. But okay, so humor and laughter. I think we covered this a bit last week. The essence of laughter, the reasons we laugh: superiority, relief, and incongruity, and the absurd. And we can talk some more about that. But I wanted to give you an example of the humor in the book of Esther. And let's just read this text together. There are 4 or 5 verses here, and let's just start over here and just go around the room and read the slide, if you would.
Then Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given as my petition, and my people as my request, for we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Now if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent. The trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king."
Okay, so let me just stop there. This is right after the second banquet that Esther throws. So Esther comes before the king. He's raised, the scepter. She comes and he says, what's your request? And she said, I'd like to have a banquet with you and me and Haman. And he says, okay. And so they plan this banquet, and they come to this banquet, and the king says, what's your request? And she said, could we have another banquet tomorrow night? And he says, okay. So she has a second one. And then the king comes to the second one and says, what's your request? And this is her request. Now I want you to look at the last sentence that's on this page. How ridiculous is that? If I was only going to be sold as a slave, it really wouldn't be worth your time, and I wouldn't say anything. Okay, so if you don't find that humorous, it's because this is the Bible. If this was a line in a Marty Feldman movie, Young Frankenstein, you would laugh at this idea. The queen is saying to the king, someone is plotting against me to kill me and my people. Now, if they were just plotting against me to kidnap me and sell me into slavery and all of my people, I wouldn't even bother with this conversation. It just really wouldn't be worth your time. Okay? So it's funny. I know you can't laugh at it because it's the Bible, but it is funny.
Then King, wait, hold on, how do I say that?
Ahasuerus.
Okay, and King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he and where is he? And who would presume to do thus? Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified for the king and the queen. The king arose in his anger from drinking wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king.
Okay, so the king had gotten really angry about Vashti, right? Remember, he was drunk, he got angry, and the only thing that Anyway, we've got that. We've got a king who has an anger management problem already established. He's angry again. He's been drinking. Now he's really angry. And Haman becomes terrified. Okay, so somehow we all are told he's terrified because he saw in the last line there that harm had been determined against him by the king. The king's so mad, he walks out of the room. Who's up? Do you mind reading?
Now, when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was fallen on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he even assault the queen with me in the house?" As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered him.
Okay, so this is like Shakespeare's comedy of errors. Is it not? I mean, really? The king comes back in and Haman's falling on the couch. First of all, I looked hard for some artwork of Haman falling on Esther's couch. It's not there. I don't think people who understand the story, which most of this artwork is Christian artwork, are going to draw the burlesque that you see in this scene. But imagine if it wasn't Bible and you were going to put on a play. Can you imagine this scene on the stage where, I don't know, you might have Haman tripping over something and falling face first into Queen Esther's lap. And at that moment, the king walks in. The king comes to this crazy conclusion. Esther has accused Haman of annihilation, of murder. He has queued her up to kill her. That's her accusation. That's the queen who the king loves. They've spent the last 2 nights together, drinking and reveling, and the king is red hot mad. And he comes to the conclusion that Haman is making a move on his wife. I mean, again, I ask you, if it wasn't the Bible in any other context, this is funny. Are you guys familiar with the picture in the bottom corner? No? Of course you're not, because it's from a 1974 movie called Young Frankenstein. And that happens to be, has anybody seen Young Frankenstein besides? Okay. So that's Igor. Igor is the just slightly not all there assistant to the young Dr. Frankenstein, not Frankenstein, Frankenstein, and he's going to build this, he is going to reanimate a dead life, and he chooses a very smart individual who has died, and he wants his brain, and he sends Igor to get this brain from the brain bank. And Igor drops the brain and says, "Oh no, what will I do? I must get another brain for my Dr. Frankenstein." So he picks up a brain, and it is labeled AB normal. And so AB normal brain is put into Frankenstein in this movie. And there is a clip where the doctor says to Igor right here, "What was the name on that brain that I just put into that monster?" And he says, "Abby something." Abby what? Abby Normal, I think, was the name. I mean, this is akin right? The king walks in after this man has been accused of being murdering his bride, and he thinks that he's, trying to make out with her on the couch while he's in the garden. This is funny. This is like slapstick. It doesn't get funnier than this. Okay? So, however, the Christian theological view of humor and laughter as lessons from the scripture has been overwhelmingly negative, dismissed as suspect or sinful. And let's talk about a few of the barriers that we have. Biblical books are expected to be only serious. The message is expected to be congruent with the message of other biblical books. A reasonable expectation, seems like. Your salvation seems to be a serious topic. Why wouldn't the books of the Bible be only serious? Laughter is not thought to be fitting or worthy part of the Christian life. Why would we be laughing when we're studying the Bible? And seriousness and humor don't belong together. Now that's one that we really don't understand, because living in the dominant culture, we don't really understand what it means to be dominated. The more dominant you are within culture, the more blind you are to domination. So let me give you an example. In our culture, if you are the dominant traits is male, under 60, white, and American. If you fall into those categories, right? You're like the dominant culture. Oh, heterosexual is another one, sexual orientation. So,
They're just thinking I'm funny.
I understand. It's okay. It's okay. So if that's the dominant culture, I have this story where this woman who is a surgeon who is working towards equality, she had this young, white, heterosexual male who was an advocate, came up to her, and she is a senior surgeon, full professor, emeritus, been through her career. And he ran up to her and said, "Dr. So-and-so, did you realize that female physicians are 60% less likely to be introduced with their title than their male counterparts?" And she said, "Since the first day of medical school." And this was an advocate. This young, white, heterosexual male from the United States was blind to this because he's part of the dominant culture. We, as Christians, ever since 312 AD, have been the dominant culture. And so, looking at a book like this, we don't understand. We can be blind to what's happening here, to how this is actually, there is a very real connection between the seriousness of life and suffering and laughter. Comedy and sobriety can go together very well, but we don't understand that. That's one of our barriers. So let's draw some conclusions here before we move to our next topic. We can really learn from this book's gravity and hilarity at the same time. We can learn some things about living by faith in conditions of oppression, but I think we could extend it even further to conditions of suffering. Communities experiencing domination may need spaces where they can play out in jokes and stories and angry speech what they wish they could actually say. What this book tells me is God understands me when I feel like I've been wronged, when I feel like I'm suffering, when I'm asking myself questions about where God is in a situation, and I'm so mad. And I use this phrase, lose my Christianity, either in my speech or my thoughts. God gets it. And there's a place for that. It's okay. God understands me. He understands me, and I know that because of what happens in the book of Esther. Our deafness to the humor in the book of Esther will deny us access to rich gifts that this book offers during a walk of faith in the context of suffering. We need to really think about that. These are serious questions that we all should think about and laugh about. Laughter is a potent theological response to the incompatibility of the call of faith and the experiences of life's sufferings and hardships. I think it's crazy to walk by faith in today's world. I mean, think about, I used the word incompatibility there on purpose. There's so much suffering in this world. There's the difference between the way God intended life to be and the way that it actually is on this planet. And then we're asked to walk as though it actually is the way God wants it to be. That's absurd. That is, frankly, comical. I would suggest also that the book of Esther is an invitation to play. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's have another example here. Who wants to read? I'm going to skip the tired girl because I know that she... Okay.
Fine.
Take it away.
So Haman came in and the king said to him, "What is to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor?" And Haman said to himself, "Who would the king desire to honor more than me?" And Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king desires to honor, let them bring a royal robe which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed."
Okay. So I want you to think about that. Okay. Again, picture in your mind that you're going to the theater and you're seeing a play or you're watching a movie, and this is the scene. This is where Haman, the king's been up all night. He realizes that somebody saved his life and revealed a plot. Haman shows up at his doorstep. He talks to Haman about this. Haman is his most trusted advisor, his highest official, happens to be there. This is happening late at night. And Haman is so full of himself that he said, "Who would the king want to honor more than me?" Like, he's not listening, right? And then listen to his requests. The royal robe that the king's already worn. I want your clothes. I don't want just fancy clothes. The king's already worn them. This is just kind of absurd. There are Greek records of Persians who have wanted to wear the king's garments and wear the king's crown, and they're killed in Herodotus' histories. Or maybe it's Plutarch. I'll have to go back and look that up. But and I think the head here is the horse, because the horse actually was out in full regalia. So who's next?
And let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them array the man whom the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, "Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor." Then the king said to Haman, "Take quickly the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so for Mordecai the Jew." who was sitting at the king's gate. Do not fall.
That's Will, yeah.
Sorry.
I gotta keep him awake.
Do not fall short in anything of all that you have said. So Haman took the robe and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and led him on horseback to the city square and proclaimed before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. And Mordecai returned to the king's gate. Haman hurried home, mourning.
Okay. Okay, this also is in fact funny. Okay, but this is the invitation to play. So I think I said at some point in the last couple of weeks that the Jewish commentaries on the book of Esther are second only to the Jewish commentaries on the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. There's just a plethora of information out there that have been written by the Jews. And the Gemara, I think is what it's called, is a commentary that the people who wrote the Gemara and the Midrash are referred to in Jewish culture as, I can't believe I'm drawing a blank, the sages. The sages wrote these things. It would be equivalent to us saying the church fathers, right? So here's what the Gemara says. And I'm going to read this because it's a little long. But it goes through verse by verse in the book of Esther. And here we are in chapter 7. The Gemara explains that when Ahasuerus said to Haman, and do so to Mordecai, Haman said to him in an attempt to evade the order, who is Mordecai? And Ahasuerus said to him, the Jew. And Haman then said to him, there are several men named Mordecai among the Jews. And Ahasuerus said to him, I refer to the one who sits in the king's gate. And Haman said to him, why award him such a great honor? It would certainly be enough for him to receive a village as an estate, or one river for the levy of taxes. And Ahasuerus said to him, this too you must give to him. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken. Provide him with all that you proposed and spoke about, in addition to what I had said. And Haman said to Mordecai, stand up, put on these garments and ride this horse, for the king wants you to do so. And Mordecai said to him, I cannot do so until I enter the bathhouse and trim my hair, for it is not proper conduct to use the king's garments in the state that I am in now. In the meantime, Esther sent messengers and closed all the bathhouses and all the shops of the craftsmen, including the bloodletters and the barbers. And when Haman saw that there was nobody else to do the work, he himself took Mordecai to the bathhouse and washed him. And then he went and brought scissors from his house and trimmed his hair. While he was trimming his hair, he injured himself and he sighed. And Mordecai said to him, why do you sigh? And Haman said to him, the man whom the king had once regarded above all of his other ministers is now made a bathhouse attendant and a barber. Mordecai said to him, wicked man, were you not once a barber of the village of Kartzum? If so, why do you sigh? You have merely returned to the occupation of your youth. And then it has a footnote there about how he knew that. And after Haman trimmed his hair, Haman dressed Mordecai in the royal garments, and Haman said to him, mount the horse and ride. And Mordecai said, I am unable, as my strength has waned from my days of fasting that I observed. So Haman then stooped down before him, and Mordecai ascended him. And as he was ascending the horse, Mordecai gave Haman a kick, and Haman said to him, is it not written, do not rejoice when your enemy falls? And Mordecai said to him, this statement applies only to Jews, but in regard to you, it is written, you shall tread upon their high places. As Haman was taking Mordecai along the street of Haman's house, Haman's daughter was standing on the roof and saw the spectacle, and she thought to herself, the one who is on the horse must be my father, and the one walking before him is Mordecai. And so she took a chamber pot full of feces and cast the contents onto the head of her father, who she mistakenly took as Mordecai. And then Haman raised his eyes in disgust afterwards and looked up at his daughter and saw that he was her father. In distress, she fell from the roof to the ground and died. Haman hastened out of the house, mourning, having his head covered, mourning over the death of his daughter and having his head covered due to what had happened to him, and his head was full of filth. Comments? Jewish commentary from the sages?
I really don't.
I mean, if you were Jewish, would you like Hitler? What are your thoughts? I heard that. Do you see what they're doing here? Do you get what's happening? The Jews have always, even today, been on the outside, on the fringes, outside of the dominant culture. There have been multiple attempts throughout history to exterminate them. They're playing. They're finding relief. They're expanding the story. They see it as an invitation to expand the story. They see it as an invitation to embellish and to express what they feel, what they know, that if they don't express it, what happens when you bury something and you don't express negative feeling? To express it, right? But if you don't, oftentimes you blow up, you explode, you retaliate, you take it out on somebody else, right? It does come out. You can't just forget it. You can't just pretend it's not there. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way God created us. Oops, wrong way. Some thoughts about play from me. I think play takes its cue from a playful creator. We play because God plays. Creation was God playing. I mean, Legos, are they not play toys? Isn't building blocks, we give kids blocks to build with, we give them Legos to build with. Are they not making something? Wasn't God making something? It appears he chose molecules and cells and atoms as his building blocks, as his Legos. Esther and Purim, the holiday, teaches us how to live with the dream of a redeemed world while knowing that we live in an unredeemed world. We're called to live with detachment while at the same time to have deep involvement. The dichotomy there is palpable. You're in the world, but you're not of the world, is what John 17 says. We're asked to live as innocent as doves, but as wise as serpents. We're to kick the world away with the grace of a dancer, but at the same time, press it close to our heart for the sake of our Creator. How many times when we read the story of Genesis does God say, "It was good"? I don't think that the fall of man made everything bad. It's still good. And God, through his church, wants to fix it. He wants to repair the world. He certainly wants to repair the relationship between himself and humanity, the relationship between people with each other. Now, you might take offense at this, but I think church and humans play kingdom much the way kids play house, play doctor. Is it not an opportunity to behave in a way for a child the way they will in the future, to make mistakes, to learn about things, Isn't that what role play is about as a kid? And they come up with it, right? Like, I don't know if you see that picture in the back, but those are very poor children playing. It is part of who we are. God created us to play, and He's asked us to play. Play and laughter are not antithetical to the seriousness of the tragedies of life, nor to the deep care that we offer the world. We offer the world God so loves. Humor and play in life of faith confirm that the power at work in the universe favors life and favors you. You can't laugh with as much suffering that's going on. You can't play if you don't have hope. I do not feel like playing when I am not hopeful. They are compatible. They are fitting companions in a world where there is hope, in a world where God really cares. And we've talked about this before. Play can be the serious work of survival in a broken world with so much suffering. I was trying to find a movie clip, and I think I'm just too much of a dinosaur to really, figure out what might connect. But there's I went back and I looked at Star Wars when Luke Skywalker pushes the buttons and the whatever they are, flares fall in and blow up the Dark Star, and it blows up. What's that? And there are certain scenes in movies, especially action films, where I get really mad during the tension mounts in the story, and there's injustice done, and something really makes you angry, and the end of the movie, justice is served. Whether it's the oppression of the empire and you blow up the Dark Star, or whether it's some crazy guy like Jack Reacher who comes out and has these, or even like the Karate Kid, they're all the same. It's the same theme. Let me put a bully in front of you. Let me get you angry. Let me raise your natural instinct for justice and fairness so that you are incensed by its absence. And then let me crush the bully. And you have this sense of all is good, all is right in the world. Hollywood is making trillions of dollars on this theme. And it's because that's the way we're programmed. That's the way God made us. He made us to live in harmony, in an environment of justice and fairness and equity. And it's not there. And we know it's not there. So you can also anyway, we're still doing this serious work of survival. Maybe not so much as the oppressed, exile, and slave, but we still get relief from going and watching movies like that, or playing games, or looking at the Seahawks, not making any mistakes. It's in essence, it's the same thing that we are, looking to try and find a way to navigate life through play. One thing the book of Esther does, and it does multiple times, is it insists on a community-wide practice of feasting and rejoicing. There's 2 chapters at the end of the book that talk about Purim, and it just says, do it, do it, do it as a community. And this invitation to play is to remember the story, to spend time with it, and to rejoice with its outcome. That's the way God has been with all of his holidays. There's a remembrance. Passover is the same way, right? You remember that God carried you out of your oppression and freed you and took you into the promised land. It is a time to spend time with the story and experience it. There's a time when Christians are supposed to have a festival, if you will, of feasting and rejoicing. We do it every week. It's called communion, except we don't know how to do it. Because laughing is not compatible with what we do. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this idea of Hebrew time. The Hebrew word for yesterday comes from the Hebrew root word in front of. And the Hebrew word for tomorrow comes from the Hebrew root in back of. Does this make sense to anybody? That doesn't make sense to me either. But let me tell you what I think is going on there. God is the only person who controls the future. And God asks us to walk into the future backwards, looking at yesterday, continually in the holidays that He has prescribed. He wants you to look back at where He has been, how He has been in your life, what He has been doing, how He has been faithful to His promises. And that's the way you back into tomorrow. We've turned it around in our brilliant wisdom. We've decided we can look into the future. We can look into tomorrow. But God says that's not the way it works. You need to go into tomorrow looking at yesterday. Yesterday is in front of you. You can actually see what happened. Tomorrow is in back of you. You don't have eyes in the back of your head. Think about that as you consider how you walk by faith. Now, last week I gave you an assignment. Did anybody do the assignment? At least one person is shaking their head. Okay. So did you come up with any good questions? Anybody? Any good questions in the book of Esther?
Is this where Shakespeare got his literary style from?
Maybe it certainly preceded him, didn't it? Okay, I have some questions that I'm going to share with you. I don't know if before the end of the class we'll be able, not today's class, before the end of this quarter we'll be able to answer all of them as we dig into the text. But please go back, same assignment, read the text, read it again. I'm going to show you some things that I found to be questionable. The first one is the story seems to be over at the end of chapter 7, but we still need 2 more chapters to talk about Purim. And couldn't it all be summed up as Haman was hanged, the Jews killed their enemies, Mordecai and Esther proclaimed the victory to be memorialized forever as Purim, and everybody lived happily ever after? Why do we have to listen to those last 2 chapters? What is the point? And they say it over and over. So when you read it, ask yourself, how boring is chapter 9 and 10, and why do I need to know this? Why is it? It seems to be redundant. Number 2, why is the holiday called Purim? We talked about that a little earlier, so I won't say anything else. Why does the book seem to celebrate Mordecai's rise to power? It's really strange. Somebody open if you're there in Esther, read the very last verse of, it's verse 3 of chapter 10.
Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people.
Okay. Could you read that just once more? Mordecai, second in rank.
Second in rank, he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all.
What's that version?
This is the ESV.
Is that what you're reading out of? Does anybody have the NIV or the ASV? No? Yeah, please.
Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of the people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews.
Interesting. The actual translation there, and I think the New American Standard says it, it says that he was held in high esteem by most of his brethren. It says a multitude in the ESV, and it says, what does it say there in the NIV? What was the word? It's a very weird verse. What? Many. It's a very weird verse because if you gloss over it, it's sort of, you're kind of like, okay, everybody loved him. But that's not what it says. It says most people liked him. And it's like, why do we need to know all this about Mordecai? I thought this book was about God rescuing his people from potential extermination. Why does the book open with the grandeur of the Persian king? I thought it was a Jewish book. It's the only book that just goes on and on. Tells you about the curtains and the dishware that they were using at their festival. It's a little weird. Why does Esther wait? Not once, but twice to make her request to the king. What's that about? When does Esther cry? Okay, so I'm freaked out. I got to go before the king. He might kill me. If he doesn't raise his scepter, I'm dead. So I'm shaking in my boots. She doesn't cry when she goes before the king that time. Then she has to go again a second time. And she doesn't cry. In 7 verse 3. When does she cry? If you look in 8, it's after Haman's dead. And I think it's after his kids have been killed. But maybe not. Maybe it's before Haman's dead. And she bursts into tears before the king. And it's like, lady, you've been in a whole lot worse situations than this. How come you're crying now? Where were the tears back then? When your life was really threatened. I don't really get it. Mordecai minimizing Esther's role. Do you remember when Mordecai goes to Esther and says, look, if you don't go, maybe for such a time as this, if you don't get up now. Now, if I were Mordecai, I would be saying, look, we need you. You're our only hope. You're the queen. You could fix this situation. What's he do? You know what? If you don't stand up, God will figure out another way. You're not really that important. Like, what? Is that supposed to be persuasive, Mordecai? Because that's not working for me. And what do you threaten her with? If you don't speak up, you and your father's house are going to be destroyed. And by the way, she's an orphan. Like, what? How is that supposed to motivate her? I don't really get that. Didn't really make sense to me. And then why does Mordecai write, destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men and their women and children and plunder their property? Like, this seems a little harsh. Okay? And, we're looking for congruency with the rest of the messages that come out of the scripture. Even if we limit ourselves to Old Testament, this does not seem quite right. And then, why do they disobey him? If he puts out that edict and decree, why do they not take anything? When Haman goes to the king, he makes a 3-point argument. He says the Jews are scattered throughout the empire and they keep separate. He says they observe their own customs and laws, making them different. And then he says they don't keep the king's laws. Why don't you just get to the point? Look, they're disobedient. They're not keeping your laws. Let's get rid of them. What's the point of the first, 2 bullets there? What difference does it make that they're scattered throughout the empire? What difference does it make that they keep separate? What difference does it make that they have their own customs? Like, is this supposed to persuade the king to exterminate this whole group of people? Like, does that matter? Maybe. And then finally, why would the king demand the queen's beauty to be put on display for other men? Are we just going to chalk this one up to he was drunk and stupid? Maybe if we answer that question, I put that note in there to myself. Maybe that should be the first question, because I think if we get that one right, we might answer a lot of these other questions. Same assignment. Go back and read. If you're interested in history, go back and look at the period. We'll come back together next week. And hopefully my wife won't come in here and say, you're holding the children's classes hostage. Thanks for your attention. Yeah, thank you.